Hi all, in this video we'll continue working on our get, put and delete mapping. Before we start, I noticed that there is a little tweak in the create flight method. One is the name, that is post data. Instead of that, we'll make it in sync with the one that we have in the controller. So let's make it as create flight and do the same in our interface as well as the service class. And in the controller, instead of return here, I'll just have the single return because the create flight is going to return the flight DTO object. Okay, so now let's continue with our get mapping. And here, now as HTTP get method does not have the request body, so we have to pass it in the URL. So what we're going to do is we are going to pass it as the path variable. We can also pass it as query parameter, okay? But here we are going to use path variable. Path variable name I'm going to use as ID, and for that we have an annotation called path variable, and the data type is integer. And if you have the same name as your path variable, then it's automatically going to map it. But if you think that you want to have a different name for your variable, then what you do is you use it over here, name option, and use that ID. So this is going to map with your path variable. So now for the get flight, the return type is going to be flight ID, sorry, flight DTO, and here I'm going to invoke the flight service dot get flight, okay, and I'm going to pass the flight ID. Okay, so this method does not exist in the interface, so let's create it. And we also need to create in the service class. Okay, so here what we're going to do is we're just going to use the flight repository, and this is, we have find by ID, and this is going to return as an optional object, that is optional object of flight, and the optional needs to be imported from util package. And here we are going to do this flight dot get, okay, and the return type needs to be changed. So what we are going to do is we are going to convert it, that is our entity object, to our DTO object. Okay, before that we need to check whether the flight that exists in the database or not. So for that we have flight dot is present, okay, not is empty, is present, and if it is present, then we are going to convert it. For that, let's create flight DTO. DTO is equal to null. I'll declare it as null, and then here I'm going to initialize it. Next, I'm going to convert using bin utils. Dot copy properties, and the source is flight and the destination is DTO, and flight is an optional, so I need to do a get, and this is going to return, this is going to be DTO, is going to be my return type. So perfect, and you can see that it says it's giving an error because I did not save the interface here. So that completes our get mapping. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass the ID in the URL, and that will be mapped to our flight ID here, and that is going to fetch the record from the database. Okay, so let's quickly test that. Let's start the application, and let's go to our Postman, and let's see first the database and what are the records do we have. We have 2 ID as 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so let's make use of 6 and go to our Postman, and here this is my get mapping, and I'll pass 6 And if I click on send, and you can see that I got the flight DTO object in the response. Okay, so that is our get mapping. So let's continue with put. For put, what we'll do is we'll be passing all the parameters in the request body, and that first we'll check in the database if it exists, then we are going to update it. Okay, for that let's use request body, and I'm going to use flight DTO, and the return type, what I'm going to do is I'm going to update or return the updated value, that is flight DTO itself. Okay, and here I'm going to invoke the flight service dot update flight. Okay, perfect. So now let's create this method in the service class, and here we are going to convert this. First we have to search if the data exists in the database. Okay, so for that what we are going to do is we are going to use the flight repo dot find by ID flight DTO dot get ID, and this is going to return us the optional object of flight, and if this exists is present, then what we're going to do is we're going to convert the flight DTO object to a detached entity object. Let's do that. Flight, and I'm going to rename this for, so I can use the flight variable here. Flight is equal to new flight, and now I'm going to convert this detached to a entity object, that is by using bin utils dot copy properties. The source is flight DTO and the target is my flight. Now I'm going to save it. Flight repo dot save, and it is flight here. And what does the flight return? The flight returns the flight object. You can see here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same. I'll do this and save it. And then after I get the session object from the database, I'm going to convert this back to my DTO object, and that DTO object I'll return here. Okay, so let's do that. And here I'm going to use the bin utils again dot copy properties, and here the source is going to be the flight and the target is going to be the flight DTO, and finally I'll return back flight DTO. Okay, so one thing that we need to remember, that what happens if the record does not exist in the database. In that case, what we do is we throw an exception. Okay, for now what we're going to do is we will just make it as a to do. Okay, because exception handling we'll see in our future session, but for now we'll just comment this out and assuming that the record exists in the database. Okay, so this looks good. And if I go back here, okay, let's save all the files. Okay, so now let's quickly test the put mapping. So what I'm going to do is first we'll do is we'll check here. We are going to update the same here, the flight ID 6, and the flight number we're going to change it to 200. Okay, and we'll change also the manufacture date. So for that I'll go to put. Before that I can copy this and use it in my put. Okay, I'll just put it here, and 6, the flight number I'll make it as 200, and the date I'm going to change it as 1990. Okay, so this is going to be my put, and if I send, let's see what happens. And you can see I got the value back. Okay, and let's go to database and confirm that. If I refresh, and you can see the record is updated. Okay, perfect. So with that, our put is working fine. So let's work on delete. For delete, what we're going to do is we don't need the entire data to be passed in the request body. All we need is the primary key, that is the flight ID. So we are going to use the flight ID, that is ID here. But if you see here, the get mapping path is now same as delete mapping. So one thing to remember, that the path should always be unique, okay, or else it will give us an error, ambiguous error that says, okay, there are two mappings with the same path. Okay, for that, what we're going to do is we're going to use, let's make it unique by using delete, and now here we're going to use path variable, and I'll name this as again ID and integer flight ID, and return type is going to be void. I'm not going to return anything, and let's remove this, and flight service, I'll call this as delete flight, and I'm going to pass the flight ID. Okay, let's create this in our interface and also implement the same here. Okay, now first thing what we're going to do is we are going to check if the record exists in the database. If it exists, then we're going to delete it. Okay, so this is going to be something similar to this. So let's copy this, and if it does not exist, then we're going to throw the exception. Okay, so first thing is we are going to search with the ID. Okay, if it exists, then we are not creating anything here. We are just going to delete, and we don't need this. So we have a method called delete by ID, and here I'm going to use flight ID, and we don't need this. Okay, and if the record does not exist, we're going to throw exception. Okay, so let's save all our files, and let's go back to our controller and see. So we are passing the ID, and we are then deleting here in the service, first by checking it and then deleting, and you can see that delete by ID returns the void. So we are the same we apply for our method. Okay, so let's quickly test it, and what we're going to do is we will try to delete number 11. Okay, let's go here to our delete, and in the URL you can see that we have delete, and I'll make this as 11. And if I send, there should be no data in the response because the return type is void, but the status is 200, so that looks good. Let's go to database and refresh, and you can see the record is gone. Okay, in real time, what did we do is we don't hard delete from the database. Okay, what we do is we do it a soft delete. What it means is in the table we'll have a flag, okay, here that says enable and disable. Okay, and when you delete it, we just disable that record. Okay, and down the line, if the table grows huge, then we purge depending on the duration. Like if you want we want to delete the records between this period, we do that by checking that particular disable flag. So it's not recommended basically to hard delete from the database. Okay, but for now, to just demo it, we are hard deleting in the database. I hope that is clear, and now we have all our mappings up and running. Okay, so that's all for this video, and I'll see you in the next session.